Hey everybody, this is Sam from Out of the Armchair podcast. We're here with Angela Wheaton tonight. We're going to talk about mental health. But before we do that, if you like what you see here tonight, go down there on YouTube and click that subscribe button. Also, you can go to Out of the Armchair podcast or find us on Facebook at Out of the Armchair podcast and on Instagram, Out of the Armchair podcast, all one word, and on Twitter at Of Armchair. I'm just going to say it one more time. I hate that handle. Can you agree with that, Calvin?
You say that every time.
Every time. I hate it. I hate it. So, we wanted to bring Angela Wheaton on tonight and talk about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, and somewhat to Calvin's as well, because we kind of discussed this subject a few times. I've had the pleasure of, excuse me, working in the treatment field for a few years now, just on as a nonprofiter. If you watch the show, you know the story. And that's kind of how me and Angela met. I think the first time we met was at a CEU event.
2 years ago. John Gallagher was my professor my second year in grad school, and we did a CLE or a CUE to promote Guidos.
Yeah.
In Narcan.
Yeah, we did training there.
Yeah.
The students put on a
What's
wonderful
Guido stand
presentation. I'm sorry?
What does Guido stand for?
Guido's Purple does the name of my nonprofit.
Oh, yeah.
Guido's my brother's nickname.
Gotcha.
And but the students really put the whole thing together.
We did.
Like everybody was like, you guys did such a great job, but really it was like you guys put that whole thing together. We just shut up and did what we do, but it was great to be a part of. So before we get into what we're going to talk about here, you just kind of want to give the audience a little background on what your education career.
Sure.
How that is.
So I started out actually in human resources for about the first 10 years of my professional career. And then when I moved here, I worked in the legal field. So I worked for the prosecuting attorney's office in child support and for some private attorneys. And it was just really punitive. It was just really, really punitive. And I got to a point where I thought, I still want to be working with people every day, but I want to do it in a different way. And so I decided to go back to school. Went back, got my undergrad in general studies with a minor in psychology, and then decided to pursue my master's in social work.
What particularly led you to social work, do you think?
I think social work was something that I always wanted to do, but as a kid, I just listened to too much bullshit about money. I listened to people steer me away from my dreams and say, you're never going to make a living like that. When in reality, had I started a lot younger doing what I wanted to do, I would have been happier longer, and I would be making more money now.
You'd have more time invested in your career.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I hear that a lot. I work with quite a bit of treatment providers and social workers, and that's one of the jokes that kind of goes around. It's like, you work 100 hours a week and you get paid for 20.
Well, I'm lucky in that regard because John Horsley. He's the director of addictions at Oaklawn where I work.
Great friend of mine.
A wonderful person, and he and my team leader, her name is Sherry Littlefield. They're both very great advocates for self-care for their staff. So I don't even have the code to get in to work on a Saturday if I wanted to. So sometimes I sneak a few extra hours in on Friday night, but yeah.
Yeah, John, when me and John first met, it was like two peas in a pod. Our mission at that point. He was speaking my language. I had contacted like every treatment provider in the area and saying, this is what we're doing. How can we help? How can we be a part of what you're doing? And John was the most receptive person that I came across, who I thought had the best ideas for getting people into treatment.
Absolutely.
So yeah, my little dog's barking up there. It's a great thing about having a podcast. Everything just happens. So and Sherry too. I've got to work with Sherry a few times. I trained Oaklawn. So it's kind of like I got to meet basically the entire staff for treatment. So
you worked a lot with Brooke. I worked with her when I did my internship at South Bend. So.
Brooke, Now there's somebody I couldn't say enough about, and Brooke is a leader in this field. I feel like, and she's so smart and so quick-witted. You know, when we were doing presentations, and I'm not a shy guy at all, you know, but she would steal the show. You know, not that it was a show, but it was like she could project really well. She's used to working in this, you know. Here I am, just this guy who had this good idea and just, you know, applied it as well as I could. But Brooke really was like,
She just has this great connection with people.
oh
This
man,
great connection when she's talking. It's
yeah,
really fun to
and
watch her.
And she can be brutal too.
She can.
And I love her for it. I love her for it. She's like, no, you shouldn't do that. Oh, okay. You're right. I probably shouldn't say that.
But personally, I decided to get into social work, or I was drawn to it because of my background and how I grew up. So I grew up in a house of addiction. From the time I was, well, my whole life that I can remember, my mom was addicted to, she was probably substance. I mean, equal opportunity user, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, yeah. No, I understand the term. I kind of grew up the same way, and that's what gave me a lot of it. Like people, it was funny when I started doing that because people were like, oh, how do you know so much about this? Like it's been my life.
Yeah.
You know, I've been in counseling. I grew up, like I said before, in a trap house. So it was kind of like my parents were, well, my parent was kind of that way too.
Right.
You know, she went through her phases. I'm gonna get too personal with her on that, but yeah. So it's funny because a lot of people that grew up that way, actually, a lot of the social workers that I know have those types of backgrounds. So they have some kind of personal investment in what they're doing, and that's to me makes an even better, counselor because now you've got relatable ground, to work with, and so on and so forth. So.
And like so many people, I think that grow up like we did, Sam. I had my own problems, so I told myself through my teens, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to be that way. I was on the front lines of the devastation that addiction can cause in families, relationships, whatever, and I still went down that road myself for a while.
Yeah, it's a real cycle.
It is. Absolutely it is. Yeah.
I think, when you're going through it, it kind of makes, I mean, it's your culture, it's your personal culture. It makes it normative, and it's like, this is what people do. I know, when I was growing up, it was like in our family, whoever was a side of our family, and I'm going to pollute the whole family.
Same with me.
Yeah, Side. One side of the family, it was like whoever had the most dope, right? Or who had the access to the most dope, they were like the most respected one. So it was kind of a hierarchy that way where, in order to be, when I was a kid, there was a time where I felt like in order to be accepted, with, a lot of the male end of my family, it was like, I've got to move a quarter ounce of meth a week to make that happen, it's not rails like train rails, and it was just like
it's like a rite of passage.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's a rite of passage, exactly. So it's funny, one of the things that we always try to do is talk about addiction as a chronic brain disease, which gets misconstrued and gets a lot of pushback. There's a lot of controversy around that, and I think that's because people don't necessarily know how it gets classified that way.
Sure.
So, I mean, maybe that's something I think maybe we could start off with, is kind of talking about what makes addiction a chronic brain disease.
Okay. Well, I start out, so I run, I'm a primary therapist in our evening intensive outpatient treatment, and still learning. I just graduated this past May, and it's amazing how much I still learn, even after going through 7 years of school. Every day, every time I go to a training, every time I see someone else present.
It's the mark of a good provider.
Watching Brooke present, I mean, so much that I've learned. But one thing I think that people don't really fully understand is just how our dopamine affects us so much.
Every one of us.
Right.
Both the addicts and the people.
Right. So if you look at us as having a baseline in our body producing a normal level of dopamine, if we were to have a good meal or have sex or go for a run, our body's going to come up with some dopamine, and then it's going to just gradually come back down the way that it should.
And just so we're clear, sex is like the highest level of
Absolutely.
dopamine.
Now remind
the natural body.
Remind those that don't know what dopamine does. What is dopamine and what does it do?
Well, dopamine's going to ignite our pleasure center, basically.
So it's kind of the pleasure hormone.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to make us, happy. It gives us that intense pleasure. And if you were to do, let's say, for example, methamphetamine, you're going to get 10 times the amount of normal dopamine in that one rush immediately. And so if you use drugs like that over and over and over again, your body says, hey, I don't need to do this anymore. He or she's doing it for me. I'm just going to stop. I'm not going to produce dopamine anymore.
Right, you're getting it from an
Mhm.
external
Yeah.
resource. Yeah.
So naturally, without addiction, dopamine's produced when you eat, when you exercise.
When you exercise.
All kinds of times.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the brain operates on a reward system, basically,
Absolutely.
Mhm.
right? And dopamine is your reward. That's
Mhm.
your reward.
Mhm.
So when you feed your kids,
Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
that makes you feel good. You get a slight rush of
Exactly,
dopamine.
exactly.
When you see your mother's face, eat a home cooked
Connection.
meal,
Yeah.
connection with
You know?
friends. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, it's really neat when we talk about it in evolutionary terms.
Exactly,
Right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
I know it's kind of what you want to get at here, but
Well, not really. It's just that often when I hear people talk about dopamine and addiction, I think a lot of lay people that haven't been through biology, like you're already over their heads, and then the message gets missed.
Even for me in grad school, it had been 20 years in
Right,
high school
right.
since I had a biology
Serotonin,
class.
dopamine,
Yeah,
what
so
the
I'm
heck
like,
is this
a
shit?
compass, what are you talking about? Like, break it down for me. You know,
Exactly.
like, draw the mushroom brain and let's talk about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
that's what I do for my clients to show them.
Absolutely.
But even to keep it more simple, I usually just draw this baseline for them and show them your brain's going to stop, your body's going to stop. It's going to say,
Mhm,
you're
mhm.
doing this for me. I don't need to do it for you anymore.
Exactly.
So then when you're not using, you're not producing. So you're not just coming back to baseline, you're going way down.
right,
Mhm.
because your brain's no
So
longer
instead of going
Right.
down to normal, you're going down to basically a depressive
Absolutely,
level. Mhm.
because your brain isn't producing it anymore.
So no
So
wonder
then
an
you have-
addict then decides they need to do something because now they're depressed.
And they're chasing the dragon. That's
Mhm.
why they're never going to get as high the second, third, fourth,
Mhm.
fifth time as they did that first time.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, I know the first time, because, you know, and I'm just going to put this out on the table. I don't think I've said this on the podcast yet, but I was addicted to methamphetamines for, oh God, 7, 8, 9 years. From about the time I was 16 till, and I had some relapse problems for a few years, but then we found out we were pregnant with Jacob,
Mhm.
and I had no more relapses. Um, so, I mean, that was a hard thing to get rid of. You know what I mean? Like, and it was funny because so when you talk about methamphetamines and baselines, okay, I think it's important that we talk about what a baseline actually is and kind of define it because we just say baseline as a blanket term and we know we know what the definition of
Sure.
a baseline is. And so, you want to kind of say what a baseline
Well, for
is?
me, I just look at my baseline as where I've just I'm not in that euphoric state. I'm not in any kind of excited state. I'm not in a fight or flight. I'm just kind of level.
So
I'm
when you're
my
at a
normal
baseline,
functional level, I can get up, I can go to work,
Mhm.
I can go to the gym if I need to, I can study for my licensing test, I can do whatever it is I need to do. I can play with my kids, have a great conversation with my boyfriend or, you know, his kids. If I'm below baseline, I'm really having a hard time even getting out of bed.
Right,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
part of dopamine's um, um, character is to make you want to do those things.
Right.
It
To give you
provides
that
motivation.
desire.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it provides
Absolutely.
that. So when you see people that, because I just kind of want to address that statement when people say, well, you know, these drug addicts, especially with heroin addicts, methamphetamine addicts, they don't take care of their kids, they're not getting out of bed, they're not doing anything. Well, this is why, because their baseline is gone. So there's no motivation there to get up and do those things. The brain is no longer going to give itself a reward for doing that. So what they have to do is seek out that external resource again to even go back to being normal. And to be real about it, like a lot of heroin addicts that I've talked to over time, is they're basically after they pass that point of it's no longer a party, they're just trying to get back to normal.
They're just maintaining.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
just
they're
trying to
fight.
still want to get out of bed and go to work. I mean, these are, you know, some of them are functional heroin addicts,
Mhm.
but they don't have. I mean, semi-functional, but they don't have. We're gonna get into this when we go to talking about clean time and stuff, but it puts you in, for one, this mental state, let alone the physical state that it puts you in, that's just agonizing.
Mhm.
You know, and it's really hard to watch somebody go through that.
It is. And I mean, it just starts taking your, you know, the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy,
Mhm.
all those things that we need that we learned about
I love
in, you
Maslow's.
know, 8th grade science or whatever. It just starts taking them away one level at a time until your life becomes unmanageable. And all you can really do is use again to get up, go to work, you know, keep yourself from actually hitting that rock bottom.
Yeah, and so so effectively, what we're
So
really
just-
saying here is that, you know, to define it as a chronic brain disease, like your brain is literally broke. right? And so people say, I had somebody the other day, I put up the short video about addiction as a chronic brain disease. Somebody pushed back on me and said, so what you're saying is that somebody who has a disconnect you?
That's okay.
So somebody who has a brain injury from a car accident, they said, well, I don't think that you should be calling drug addicts, having a chronic brain disease, because that's like saying somebody who got in a car accident and had their brain, smashed in is the same thing. But it kind of is.
Yeah.
It kind of is in a way, not so much a physical way, but the way that the brain actually operates and how, through some head trauma, it can't operate effectively anymore.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, anyone that has a traumatic brain injury, if you're trying to work with them, so many things can be affected by that.
It blows my mind people make this argument, because people don't seem to understand the brain is part electrical and part chemical, and between every single nerve is chemical.
Absolutely.
Dopamine and so on. And I think this is something people miss, and then they're like, well, it's not like there's physical damage. And it's like, well, if you look at a broken piece of electronic equipment, you can't always see physical damage, but it's still broken.
Well, and it does definitely, I don't know the exact science of this, but it does definitely affect the way that the neurons and the receptors work in there as well. It's not just that rush of dopamine.
Yeah.
But I guess I look at it like, when I'm saying this to my group, when I'm teaching the addicts about addiction, or the people in my group, struggle with the word addict. I struggle a little bit, and I don't know why. I think just because of the negative connotation that it has in society. So we talk about that a lot in my group. What do you feel when someone calls you an addict? That's another subject. I talk about something like diabetes.
Oh, we're totally getting into that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, put a signpost there and let's come back. That's good.
That's the diabetes. That's my analogy. That's my favorite one.
Absolutely, and there's so many that are like that.
Yeah.
Heart failure, high blood pressure, diabetes. When we talk about choice versus disease, surely every first thing we do is a choice. That first time we use, it's absolutely a choice. Maybe the second and third time we use, it's a choice. Just like if someone is to be sedentary at a job and not go to the gym, that's a choice. They're going to eat a lot of sugar, foods high in fat, that's a choice. But then, is diabetes not a disease? Is it not to be treated because they did that to themselves?
Yeah, they don't deserve.
Right.
Yeah, you hear this language all the time, and it's just unbelievable. Oh, they don't deserve it because they did that to themselves. And it's like, so does somebody that eats a Big Mac every day not deserve health care?
Right.
Right.
We know what that looks like. Go to Walmart at midnight. You'll see it.
Well, then, it's funny how you can easily draw the analogy between all these other medical conditions along with, addiction as a chronic brain disease. And people don't see that. And I think one of the things that people get caught up in this conversation is the context of the conversation. When people want to argue back and forth about whether it's a choice or whether it's a disease, right? And the context gets lost in that conversation, I think, a lot of times, because people are like, well, you choose to use. And just like you were saying, yeah, you may choose to use the first time, second time, third time. These things, from what I can tell, I'm not a neuroscientist, but when I can tell, each individual is different on when that addiction actually sets in.
Sure.
So it's like people say they made this choice, you know what I mean? And it's just like you were saying, or you were saying too, when you make a choice to eat bad, you know what I mean, to eat bad foods, or to eat too much sugar, or have one too many Twizzlers, it's like, now all of a sudden, because you made that choice, you don't deserve medical treatment. I mean,
it's absurd.
How many of you guys would have dead grandparents out there right now?
Right.
If we thought that way across the medical spectrum. So that's something to really take into consideration. When we say addiction is a chronic brain disease, we're not saying these people didn't make a choice that may have put them in this position. A lot of times there's underlying mental factors that go into those decision making. What am I trying to say? Decision making points at the same time. Like, there's reasons, you have motivations why you tend to go out and do things that abuse your body.
So this is my favorite part that I get to teach when I'm teaching class. Have you guys heard of ACEs? You heard of the adverse childhood experience?
Oh.
So there's a study done a long, long time ago, 17,000 people in this study. I think it was like a 20-year study from the CDC.
Do you know who it was?
The CDC did the study. So the Center for Disease Control did the study. And they did this study over 17,000 people, and they categorized, it's like 10 different categories of childhood trauma or adversity that you can go through. And it's not like, I think there's a TED Talk about it that's amazing. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but it's just an amazing TED Talk. She's a doctor, a physician, and when she learned about this, she went all the way through medical school, treating juveniles, treating young people without knowing or learning about this study in med school. So someone finally brought it up to her, and they talk about these like 10 categories. So it's like, have you ever been abused physically? Have you ever been sexually abused? Have you ever witnessed domestic violence? Have you ever felt like you're not cared for by your family? The higher your ACE score absolutely causes you to have higher chances for heart attacks, higher chances for, I think it's like high blood pressure. There's so many things.
It's unreal.
It's not just your physical and your mental, it's everything, and higher chances for addiction. And so when we really look at, when I'm doing an assessment on someone and I'm really talking about everything, I want to talk about, how's your health? Have you been to a doctor? What's your addiction history? Now tell me about your family history. Tell me about what you've been through. And the number of ACEs, the higher it is, the more likely they are to have addiction problems and health problems.
That's interesting that we can look at stuff like that and bring all these factors, because not that long ago we didn't know that much about addiction.
Absolutely.
I mean, I could say even in the last 10, 15 years, like that study has expanded at such a high rate that now we're able to kind of pinpoint
for medics.
Yeah, we're kind of
Big data.
We're able to pinpoint, what exactly is going on in the brain, what kind of outside influences cause this type of thinking, these types of bad decision making for yourself. And to me, it's been amazing to watch the field change, because it seemed like we were stuck in this, and I don't want to say anything bad about 12-step meeting. My mom's celebrated her 15th birthday this year through 12-step meetings. Yeah, she's 15 years clean, and so not to say that there's no utility there, but I'm wondering,
like 5% or something, evidence based or something. It's
well
lower than people realize.
Well, it depends on how you look at that too, because
Anyway, keep going.
When I talk to people, man, I expect relapse. Okay, so when you say that a program doesn't work because somebody relapsed, that's
that's ignorant. Yeah.
So yeah, now you made me lose my train of thought.
I actually define it to my clients as a chronic relapsing brain disease. I don't want them to be embarrassed or ashamed to come to me and tell me if they've had a lapse or a relapse. I want to talk about it and work through it with them.
I've had people push back just because they were like, "Well, I don't have a disease."
Oh, sure.
I'm like,
I had someone do that this week. Absolutely.
Did you? Yeah, interesting.
I mean, if you think about how society looks at it, we've come a long way as a field, but really, just get
as
on
a
Facebook
society, it's still
and look
a moral failing.
Absolutely, still a moral failing.
That's something that I'm probably bad for when I see stuff like that on Facebook. I can't just keep scrolling.
It's the only time I see you get really cranked up.
I'm like, look, this is what you don't know about this situation here.
But I think what makes me so angry, though, Sam, is that there's so much information out there. If they would just have an open mind to read about it.
We talk about that here all the time. It's like, now, we just made the reference a couple weeks ago where it was like, we're kids who grew up where if you wanted to learn something, you had to read encyclopedias, right? You had to go
check out microfilm at the library.
Yeah,
and now my phone has thousands of encyclopedias, and people can't be bothered to look.
And just for the point of information and education here, you can actually download an app from the Elkhart Public Library, and you can have every book that they have in audiobook form on your phone.
Yep.
That's awesome.
On your phone. So there's no reason.
There's no excuse.
No excuse anymore. You get
LibriVox.org.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is people don't with anything research their opposition.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you lose the opportunity to change your own mind, and you present yourself with an opportunity to sound ignorant. Basically.
Angela, every time that I talk to somebody that's having a bad attitude, seems like a repeating theme I hear is people will tell me, I tried X, Y, and Z in my 20s or in high school or whatever, and I was strong enough that it didn't bother me. What's wrong with these people? And it seems like people don't comprehend why one person does a drug or even alcohol and it ruins their
That's
life.
a drug.
Of course it is,
Sorry.
but people don't think of alcohol as a drug. Caffeine's a drug. People forget what drug actually means. But then the next person does it, and they're perfectly fine. I can drink. I can quit drinking. I don't have alcoholism. I know other people that worst thing that ever happened. What is it that makes the difference?
So I think that's one of the biggest things that my clients struggle with as well.
Mm-hmm.
Why me? Why can't I be that person that can go out to the bar and have a few beers, or play cards with my friends and have a beer here or there, and then not think about it again for a month or 6 months? Why can my friends be social and I can't? And I don't know that there's really one answer for that. I talk a lot in my group about nature versus nurture. We
Absolutely.
have the nature versus nurture discussion all the time.
Just talk about that for a minute. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit?
So I have everyone, a part of our curriculum, it's not just my curriculum, part of the OPLOM curriculum is we have everyone draw a genogram, which is basically just a fancy word for your family tree.
Right.
We start out with ourselves, with our parents, probably just have them go up to grandparents or great-grandparents. But then instead of talking a lot about, marriages, talk a little bit about that, but we label each person on each side of our family tree as far as if they had addiction, if they were chronic, if they were a binge user, if they were a nicotine user, if there was violence, depression, mental illness, anxiety, okay? And then we say, can you see where maybe you learned some of this learned behavior from? Sure, the genes might be there, and that's even argued still in society. Some scientists say that they think there's an addiction gene. Some scientists say that they don't think there's an addiction gene. Go ahead.
Well, that's interesting because I had a conversation with John, and when I was trying to tie addiction to evolutionary terms, and there is no good study for that right now. But there was one where it said basically the gene that creates the addiction in us, right, is a fossilized virus.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which I don't want to talk too much about it because I can't remember all the details. Because when I said it to John, he kind of said, "Well, I was like, okay." I was like, okay.
That's interesting.
If somebody wants to invest like 40 hours, Robert Zapolsky, who's the behavioral biologist at, I want to say UC Berkeley,
I don't like investing
pretty famous.
40 hours in my job.
Yeah, but it's on YouTube and on Berkeley site and stuff. But it's an entire course on human behavioral biology, and he goes through repeated examples for everything from addiction to life about. Can we trace this to nature? Can we trace it to nurture?
Right.
And he's both an endocrinologist and a primatologist and on and on and on. And in each case, if you try to find it all in nurture, you can't find it. If you try to locate the specific gene, you can't find it. And it's like a ghost.
Right.
And you can usually find about 90% on either perspective, and then you're like, so whenever somebody says, oh, it's all nurture, I'm like, nope. And when somebody says, I have the gene for such and such, therefore my life is, I'm like,
yeah, I have the feeling like it's a good mix
Facepalm.
of the two.
Yeah, so it's nature and nurture. That's very clear.
So we have them look down their genogram, and then they say, okay, well, so everyone on the side of my family had this gene, maybe, or maybe one person was an addict, and then this is how they formed relationships. And this is how tumultuous this relationship was.
And addicts
and
attract
this
addicts.
Person
and
underneath
addicts.
them, this daughter or this son learned. If we're looking up and all we're seeing are our parents using, it's normalized for us. If we're seeing domestic violence, it's normalized for us. That pattern repeats.
Well, certain traits are turned off within short gene. What am I trying to say?
You're basically
gene pools, basically.
Yeah, but you're talking about how there might be something that is in your genes, but it's turned off until it hits a certain environment or
certain environment or a certain
can trigger it.
Can trigger it, yeah.
Or even some,
which is literally nature and nurture.
Right.
Literally.
So I think we agree that it's nature and nurture, that there's a factor of both of those there.
In everything, I think.
Yeah.
In everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess some of the underlying issues with addiction comes with certain types of mental illnesses a lot of times, and I don't know if that's necessarily true to be for addiction, because I feel like everybody has some type of mental illness. Like we say to each other all the time, oh, we're crazy, our family's crazy, but you just got to know how to handle us. So I feel like everybody thinks that they have some kind of mental illness going on, and I don't know how true that is and how that would.
This is where I get into how important connection is. and what an individualistic society we are.
Isn't that
Connection
the
is the
truth?
opposite of addiction to me.
Isn't that the truth?
So the Rat Park study from years and years and years ago.
Can you explain that? That's beautiful.
I can
love
explain some of it. I'm not an expert on it by any means, but basically, scientists back, I think it was like the late 70s, it was published like 78 to 81. They took rats and they put them basically in solitary confinement, all by themselves, just male rats, female rats, and gave them a morphine drip and a tap water drip. They always went to the morphine. Then they created this rat park, which was like 200 feet more, had balls, and it was co-ed. There were girl rats and boy rats.
Heaven for
they could
rats.
have sex. They could run on the wheel. They could do anything. None of it
Places
chose
to
morphine.
hide, whatever they wanted.
Because they had the connection.
Because they had the connection.
And my understanding is that some of the rats in that study would occasionally use, but would not get addicted, would not lose weight, would not.
So they use
and
it.
they sweetened the
Is
water.
it recreational then?
Yeah, they were literally recreationally using it, which is what was
rats
so weird.
recreationally using morphine. No, I remember that study, man. It was a really interesting study because I when I first started reading about it, I thought for sure it was going to go one way, and then
it blew my mind.
It blew my mind when they said, well, then we put them in with a community, you know, of people, and you know.
You know what makes me sad? That study was literally done before I was born. Yeah, I know I'm young. I didn't hear about it till like 3 years ago.
I didn't hear about it.
Like
until
this is terrible. Like this is like an
Even
almost
through
40-year-old
grad
study.
school, yeah. And you're reading it, and the same as Sam said, I'm waiting for
new.
it to go one way. And I do think that it kind of lends itself a little bit farther to the nurture, and it kind of minimalizes the nature part of it a little bit, because the scientist, was it Bruce Alexander? Is that who did it? I can't remember.
I don't know. Can we look that up? Can we see?
Yeah.
I think it was Alexander is who did it.
Our wonderful producer will look that up. So that the fact's great. We'll post a link to this in the description as well.
So so I'm reading this book by him called Chasing the Scream. So there's this book called Chasing the Scream. So I can't remember if he's the one that did the study or not, but it lends itself to saying, hey, I don't think this has anything to do with nature.
Yep, Bruce Alexander and Simon Fraser.
Okay, yeah.
Canada.
Yep.
So,
but John Calhoun? What is it? John Calhoun's Rat City is what that study is. Am I reading that right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So when we unpack this in group and we talk to people about, hey, what is your connections like? Do you have social support? How many people in your family are sober? How many people in your family are alive? How many people in your family have mental health issues? Like, what is your actual, like, how much human connection do you have? It's very minimal.
And I think self-esteem has a lot to do with that too, because you could be surrounded with people who love you, but if you can't take that in and realize that those people love you in the way they do, I mean, that can have a negative effect on you as well.
And I talked to John a little bit. Hopefully he doesn't mind me saying this tonight before I came in, just texting him, letting him know I was coming. And he was talking about addiction being kind of an adjustment disorder.
He wasn't talking about kayaking?
No, he wasn't talking about kayaking. Or what is the sport where they like rub the ice, and he loves that sport.
Shuffleboard?
No.
Curling.
Curling.
Yeah, curling. Or rugby.
So, but an adjustment disorder, basically, like we're talking about this childhood stuff that disrupts our ability to attach to any human person.
Like learning disabilities will do this to people sometimes.
Absolutely.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I when I see addicts, I so often see people that clearly were never diagnosed, but they're adults, and you can see ADHD in them. You can see
on the
autism spectrum in them. You can see, whatever.
On the flip side of that, I know a lot of really, really brilliant and smart addicts, and very, very creative addicts, and so I don't know how, I don't know how true that would be for.
Well, intelligence and learning disability often go together.
Well, I think what you're talking about
Okay.
though is the frustration that they feel from having that learning disability.
I don't know how to talk about this without sounding improper. So, from a therapist perspective, explain why, because this blows people's minds often. People sometimes that are unusually intelligent find themselves unusually sad and lonely. And I see a lot of very intelligent people. I have a former boss that was this way. For him, it was alcoholism, unbelievable alcoholism. But it was because he was so brilliant, he was lonely all the time.
That lack of connection and feeling understood.
Well, why does that work that way? Because people don't understand. How can you be smart and?
I can tell you that pretty much on layman's terms. It's okay. This is why we talk about this a lot. We talk about, okay, so when me and Calvin are having a conversation outside of the podcast, it is very
This
I
was
don't
the
know,
modest thing I didn't want
yeah,
to
it takes a fair amount of thinking and knowledge to get to where we're talking about. So, what I've found is when I try to have these conversations with people who don't necessarily understand the language or don't have any idea about the topic or even want to go into that topic, they turn and treat you like you talking about it is stupid.
Yeah, like you're an idiot.
Like you're an idiot for wanting to know, does God exist, or what's our purpose,
Or staying up till 2 a.m. reading random physics articles.
Well, it's like
Right.
it's like we've been taught so long. I love the meme that I shared. It said, we've been taught so long not to talk about politics and religion that we no longer know how to talk about politics and religion. And I think that goes into why people feel disconnected because, you go to have these conversations and you may be a brilliant guy, but maybe put in a blue collar type of, I don't want to say blue collar, um, um, a
Less intellectual environment.
less intellectual environment. Exactly.
I know a lot of middle upper class college educated people that are very unintellectual.
Yeah, so I think that is part of the reason that there's that disconnection because
Do you see
can't
this in your
express
practice
yourself
much?
that way.
I do. And again, for me, it all goes back to connection, and it all goes back to how our society looks at people that have mental health diagnoses. So I'll have someone come in my office and I'm thinking as a new therapist months ago, like, I'm going to have to just pull this out of people. Like, they're not going to tell me, who am I? They're going to, especially if it's someone of a different race or culture, they're older than me, they're not going to tell me anything. When I get them into my office and we get to the part about their childhood, it just pours out of them because I'm sitting there and I'm taking it in from them. And I'm taking it off of them for a minute. I'm listening to them. I'm not judging them.
They can't wait to unburden
They
themselves.
can't wait to unburden themselves. Absolutely.
And talk to somebody that they feel really cares.
Right. So I think that
understands.
it's just that lack of connection and understanding. And, all of this from it's a choice and not a disease to we can't talk about anxiety or depression. We come from this pull yourself up from the bootstraps society. It doesn't matter where you've come from or what you've been through in this society. It's hard work can fix everything.
Yeah.
Hard work does a lot, but it can't fix some of these things.
It can't. No.
You can work hard at addiction, and that's not enough.
And when working hard at addiction, right? Like that's something you do for your entire life after. You're talking about one of the things I always thought was weird about the conversation is like, there's always this notion that we shouldn't put too much pressure on the addict, right? Because we want them to still want to seize the opportunity to find recovery. But and I guess 12 steps kind of says we'll take it one day at a time. But in reality, in the back of your mind that you're talking about a lifetime without doing something that your body loves to do. And that can become very, very scary to people.
Very scary to people. Very scary. And it feels, and I don't think that that's necessarily just the substance that they're so afraid to give up. I think it's the whole lifestyle that went around with it.
Well, it's like giving up a family member.
Yeah, and we're asking them to give up the people that they hung out with and that they've known maybe for years, the places that they hung out with, the things that they did. That lifestyle becomes just as much a part of the addiction as the actual drug does. We're saying change everything. The most vulnerable time in your life, you probably feel physically sick. Cut off all your friends. Don't go back to the places that you've been before. Come to these, groups or meetings where you know nobody and bury your soul.
Yeah.
Be as vulnerable as you've ever been in your life with
While
all
you're
these
feeling
strangers,
embarrassed.
And some of my clients come to me. Are you guys familiar with the stages of change? Like for people who
Go ahead and explain it. Yeah.
So stages of change is kind of, I guess, I don't want to say on its way out, but the new.
But this is a model of what happens from what to what.
An addiction.
Okay.
So we use more motivational interviewing now, where we try to have a person come up on change talk on their own. We just kind of try to guide them to that change talk.
It's the most effective. It's the most effective.
And what is change talk?
Change talk would be like me saying, so it sounds like Calvin, you really like doing this, and this, and this is also more important to you. So you're always ending on that change talk for them, depending on whatever it is, So
that's a technique a therapist would use.
Yeah, yeah. But before we would gauge how ready someone was by looking at the stages of change. So they're in pre-contemplation. They don't think they have a problem whatsoever. I drink I drink during the week. I go to work. I pay my bills. I don't have a problem. Then they go to contemplation. Maybe they have some family members that are talking to them and saying, hey, man, you're drinking too much. Like it's interfering with our life at home, or you're using too much. And they start thinking, okay, maybe I need to talk to somebody. Maybe I need to do something. And then that might keep going and keep going. And they get to the preparation stage. They start preparing to make a change. They might call around to try to find some treatment centers, think about going to an AA meeting.
Talk to some friends. Yeah.
Talk to some friends. Then they come to the action part where they actually go. That's when they're in my office or they're coming to a meeting. They're in a group. They're in the action part. Then maintenance. But a lot of my clients are court ordered. So they don't get a chance to go through pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation.
Somebody tells them you will show
They're
up.
pushed into action.
Okay, because I'm gonna steer this a little bit here, because we've come to an interesting point in the conversation that I always wonder about. And so when you have people who are forced into treatment like that, real quick, are they generally less receptive to what what the end goal should be?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, I kind of came out on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about Michigan and their marijuana laws and stuff like that. And I made this statement, and I think I've made it to John Gallagher before. Like, I see a problem with the way that we handle drug laws, and the way that helps stigmatize the situation. And it's almost like, because you do drugs, now you're a criminal. So it ties this narrative to your personality that you don't necessarily agree with. But now society has to look at you that way because you've been criminalized, simply for using. Now, I'm not talking about high-level drug dealers or anything like that. I'm talking about an addict who probably got pulled over with a bag of marijuana or some cocaine in their car. And it's going to lead me to another subject as well too, which I'm interested to hear how you feel about. But my idea is what we're doing. Like, I understand we have to protect society. So again, I'm not talking about high-level drug dealers, violent drug dealers, that at all. I'm simply talking about people who use drugs. And what happens is they're instantly criminalized in the way that we approach this in our community. And so there's this stigma, and we all know about stigma. The more you add the stigma, the less
shame and guilt.
Yeah, the shame, the guilt. Now you've been labeled this, like I said, this negative narrative to who you are, and now you're even more ashamed to go talk to somebody that you have this. So I think, does that make any sense to you? Like, that probably plays a part in the stigma, and why even people who don't use look at addicts in that way.
It does play a part in the stigma, and it also starts another cycle when someone's in the legal system. If they were having any problems that led them maybe to use, like socioeconomic status, they weren't making very good money, they had some personal stuff going on. Now we're going to put them in a situation where they're paying probation fees, work release fees.
And you're talking about,
don't you think too that
sometimes people don't even have work at that. So one of the problems of getting people into treatment is one, they don't have the money, right? Because the situation you tend to find yourself in, when you do hit this rock bottom area, you decide that you actually want to go get treatment. A lot of these people don't have insurance, barely have jobs, and the jobs they do have, they probably don't make enough to even get themselves the proper treatment that they need.
And don't comment, Angela, on something that would get you in trouble. But I mean, both of us own our own businesses, so we can share our minds. Yeah, but I often think that when we talk about criminalization, one of the things I often hear people say, I don't want to decriminalize X substance because I disagree with it. And there's plenty of substances I disagree with using I would never use. But it seems like when you criminalize, we were all teenagers once. And we understand when you're a teenager, if something's forbidden, it's exactly what you'd like to do. Mm-hmm. And maybe not everybody, but plenty of teenagers are just
prefrontal cortex
so
is developed.
It almost seems to me that the less something's criminalized, the less motivation there is to show that you're an outlaw by doing
exactly that.
Yeah.
We're having studio
slight technical thing. Hang on, people. I'm hoping we're still on the air here. So.
Yeah, I think we're still on the air. They're still picking us up right there.
Might have to use the other light.
Anyway, keep going. So we were talking about. Do you agree that may be an issue, Angela?
Sure. And like I talked to you guys a little bit before we started and went live, one of the reasons that I did.
You guys should see my producer over here trying to figure out what's going on. This
Am
is
I
great.
on camera?
Huh? No, you're
No,
on.
No.
I think
See if
the
that
Crawling
power
around
strip
on the
flipped.
floor and doing a great
I
job.
think the
She's
power
a wonderful
strip
person.
went.
See if that needs flipped.
What did I flip down?
If that's not it, then it's this cord right here.
Yeah, I think it is.
Can you reach back there? I can't get there.
There we go.
Hey, we're back on. Thank you, producer. Allie is
It's always an
earning her
exciting
keep.
Can you kick our monitor back on for us there, Allie, please? Yep, there you go.
She's kicking on a
All
monitor
right.
that you guys can't see, but that's important to us.
It's getting there. All right.
There we go.
Wonderful. I don't know if you'll see
Follow
her
learning
cross in front of the
experience.
camera real quick or not.
Hey, you live and you learn, you know. So,
Want to say hi to the camera as you walk across?
Not really.
So like I was sharing with you guys.
There she was.
Before we started, one of the reasons that I went into social work and left criminal
Mm-hmm.
justice is because I wanted to be on a less punitive side of helping people.
And I'm impressed you can keep your train of thought.
Good
job. That's intelligence.
This is really important. It's
Yeah, it is.
a really
It
important
is,
part
yes.
to me. So when I do definitely think that it worsens the stigma. Now having marijuana legalized 10, 15 miles away, I also run the brief marijuana treatment group right now.
Mhm.
And that's a struggle, because I have people who are coming in and they're charged with possession, and 10 miles away they could do it recreationally.
It's unbelievable.
The way that I handle that and the way that I believe, and what I tell my clients when they come in is, this is a 10-week class. There should always be other things we should be able to reach for to lessen our depression, to lessen our anxiety, to lessen our boredom. We need good, healthy coping skills. And substances don't have to be those coping skills.
Mhm.
So if you can't make it through this 10 weeks of marijuana treatment with me without smoking, then you have maybe you have an
You have a
addiction
problem.
and you have a problem and you need a higher level of care.
Although I
So-
wish I could say I didn't know anyone who uses it basically medicinally, and it works for them. I know people like that.
Oh, sure, yeah,
But,
I mean-
I hate
And we
to.
we don't even get into
Yeah.
that discussion in
well, I
my
mean, you
group,
can
'cause-
you can look at opioids. I mean, opioids has a medical effect. Right?
Yeah, I don't know as
I wouldn't say
in the
that.
same way, but yeah, sure.
Well, no, obviously not in the same way, but they both still have a medical.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think it's much different.
As far as that
So-
goes, I spent some time working as an EMT, and one of the things that, talking about opioids, it amazes me that we haven't gotten in the opioid conversation and in the medical community at large. We, as a medical community, do not know how to treat chronic pain. We don't have a tool.
right.
Opioids are bad for chronic pain. If you get,
I don't know if we don't have a tool. I just don't think we're using the right ones.
well, I should say
I'll
opioids
say-
are not the tool,
right.
and they're used
Mines
as
are
the
just
tool.
staying too closed. I
Now,
mean, that is a struggle
If
for me
you
when I
break
have
your
someone-
femur and you don't have a problem with blood pressure, to get you to the hospital and to help you for a couple days, opioids are an awesome thing,
Right.
and I'm thankful we have them. But the fact that we're using them as a chronic medication blows my mind.
And back to the study that I was talking about earlier with the ACEs and the adverse
Mm-hmm.
childhood experiences, none of our healthcare is holistic.
No,
We
it's not.
don't, when you go into a doctor's office, they don't ask you, hey, how do you deal with stress? What do you do for stress? Do you have anxiety? Do you have, you can go in and fill out a depression inventory and walk out with Zoloft or Prozac or within 10 minutes of being your primary
There's
care
no
doctor.
discrepancy there.
There's no holistic care. We need
Let
more
alone if you're
holistic
going to a couple
care.
specialists,
Right.
they don't even know what each other are prescribing sometimes. It's a mess. It
Or
really
if we
is.
had true holistic care where you went to one place and you could see your primary care doctor and then go see your therapist, see your pain management doctor, and they all actually communicated with each other.
Like they do at
and
Mayo
talked-
Clinic and
right,
some
and talked
places.
to each other. Yeah,
Yeah,
We know how to do this. We just don't do it.
we do. We know how. Yeah.
Go to Mayo or Cleveland and we do this, but the rest of the country,
So
Sad.
I want to talk about harm reduction a little bit because I'm a big fan of John Gallagher's model of harm reduction. I'm a big fan of that because. So what? Are you familiar with John
I am.
Stenson? Okay, good.
Are you going to define it here?
Yeah, no, I know you are because he talked about it, and
He
I
did.
think he made some people mad even that day.
In every training that I think he does, and he talks about harm reduction and kind of pushes back against abstinence-only programs. I think he said a couple of times he's had people flip over chairs in anger, throw chairs, because they've been doing this for so long. Now, you would think in the therapeutic community that minds would be a little bit more open to other perspectives.
No, not always.
But.
Well, it's been, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier, right? It's been the same thing. We've been looking and going at this problem the same way for decades, and maybe even longer. But it's just like, so what John's model of harm reduction is, and I don't think it's just John's model. I'm pretty sure he did some research.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure who came up with the model. I'm not sure. But basically what it's saying is, if you do heroin, right, you have a problem with heroin, and it's just going to lead me to another question for you.
Okay.
But if you do heroin and you have a problem with heroin, but at the same time, you may use marijuana recreationally, you may be a social drinker, and what this harm reduction model says is, let's deal with what is the actual biggest problem that this person has. And so if this person has a problem with heroin, they say, well, okay, let's bring them in, let's treat them for the heroin, let's concentrate on the heroin. Let's not worry so much about the marijuana usage and the alcohol usage. Because what happens is people go into treatment, and what she's talking about, abstinence-based care, is where you have to, you're drug screened every so often.
Every week.
Every week.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Twice a week sometimes.
Yeah. I guess it depends on.
Depends on your care facility.
Yeah, where you're going and where you get your care from, exactly. And if you don't pass that with flying colors, you run the risk of being kicked out of your support program. So what that does is leaves people who are passing. Okay, let's say this person has a heroin problem, like I said, and they don't test positive for opioids, but they test positive for marijuana or alcohol. Well, then they run the risk of being kicked out of that program and being left out without any support after a long extensive clean time. And especially when you're dealing with opioid addicts, that's a huge factor. When you have clean time and then suddenly yank somebody's support system out from under them, causing them to go back and relapse, because then you're running the risk of losing your life, basically, because now you don't have now that you've got some clean time, you're I'm at a loss for words. You're no, not your baseline, your tolerance level.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, your tolerance level. I'm sorry, your tolerance level has gone way down.
Okay, yeah. So you were talking about this.
Yeah, people think they can go back to using what they were using before during the relapse, and then they end up overdosing, and then they got to get shot up with a kit from me. But
can you explain how death happened that way, real quick, Sam? Because you explained it to me when we were talking just personally a few weeks ago, and that blew my mind because I'd never thought about that part. But how somebody will be clean for a while and will go through a relapse, and it's that first relapse when they die.
Yeah, and that's what happened to my brother. He had 6 weeks of clean time, maybe 7 weeks of clean time, and he actually, been struggling to get clean for a while. He went out and he got a job, came back to town, was trying to do what he was supposed to do, back to normal life like he wanted to be. He got his first paycheck, and went bought some heroin, overdosed, and died. And
this is heartbreaking because I hear people say when somebody overdoses, oh, they've been doing this forever, they can't get help. And here's somebody that it's their first relapse, and it's really, yeah.
If I had the numbers, I would allude to what the percentages are that happens, but I don't have those numbers. But I know that it's a big enough problem that we talk about it quite a bit in this line of work. So
well, especially with heroin too, because.
And this is why I get furious when I hear people be judgmental
for people
that have
72 hours.
Yeah,
72 hours. Your tolerance is
really
gone.
For heroin?
Yeah,
that's unbelievably fast.
So even if they're just doing a very small amount, they maybe go to jail for 3 days, get out, and they use the same amount that they used right before they went in, they're going to overdose.
So whenever me and Brooke went and talked to law enforcement, we tried to push that narrative too. Like, okay, if you have a heroin addict that you get in here, before you release them, give them this information so they know, because you'd be surprised how many people don't know that, who think they're, I hate to use the term, but professional heroin user. And, they think they know everything about it, and then, this is a fact.
But this is very similar to like drinking a couple beers, every weekend at the bar, you're fine, this is fine, and then you skip 2 weekends, you go, you do the same thing you always do, and you're stumbling drunk and get arrested for public intox. I mean, it's
Right.
that big of a, like,
Right. Except
and everybody knows what their alcohol tolerance is and what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
and
unbelievable.
so maybe lose my train of thought again, Calvin. So he's good. He's really good for
We
that.
were talking about harm reduction.
Yeah, harm reduction. So basically, what John was talking about was, we don't worry about necessarily worry about the marijuana and the alcohol use. We concentrate on the heroin and we keep them in treatment. And then once we get the problem with heroin somewhat eradicated or under control, then maybe we can start working on these other issues that this person is having. So it's not saying, okay, you have a problem with heroin, but it's okay if you do marijuana and alcohol. We're not worried about that because that's not the narrative. It's really about dealing with the more major issue at hand.
Right.
to
There's
give
so
more
many
effective
layers. I
treatment.
wish I would have brought a pen because every time we're talking about something, I think of something else that I want to bring up or talk about.
There is, and that's
There
what
is.
I've been going through it all night. We've been sitting here and like he'll say something, I'm like, oh yeah, and then you'll respond like, oh yeah, I got something for that too. Yeah. It's interesting. It happens to me a lot on the podcast. We're just like, okay.
So I will say that where I am right now, we have come a long way in that, and that we do have a harm reduction group at this point.
Good.
And the opiate group that we run is also run on a harm reduction from that standpoint. So we're more concerned about the
Now,
opiates.
when did that start? Over there?
We just started the opiate group within the past few months.
Nice.
So, and I believe there's now a heroin anonymous around here in Elkhart, just started. So even if you're needing just that sober support in the community, if you wanted to Google that, there's a meeting for that now. And also I wanted to give props to, even in Elkhart, it took a long time for drug court to get here. So we talked a little bit about the punitive nature. We talked a lot about how people are labeled and you get a felony and you feel like your life is over. We have drug court now in Elkhart.
Now, what's drug court?
Drug court is a specific court just for people who are going through drug-related offenses, that if they go through, and there's a lot of criteria they have to meet. Non-violent.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of criteria they have to meet, and we're just starting this now at my campus. We've been, there's a drug court in South Bend that Oaklawn has been a part of for a long time now, but we're just starting this, so I'm brand new at it.
This John Galler we've been talking about all night is a big part of that.
Right. And so if they, and our new prosecutor, Vicki Becker, gets a lot of credit in my eyes because she was the one open to doing this. And
I love Vicki.
I do too.
I love working with her. She's so easy to talk to.
And but if they go through all of these different steps, it's kind of like a pretrial diversion. If someone gets caught with marijuana, you're good for a year. It's a lot more in depth than that, but they don't have that felony charge held over their head at the end of all of it. So
so leaves them with a little hope of getting out of the situation, getting their lives back on track. Yeah, I just heard about this a few months ago that they were starting to implement this in Elkhart County.
Yeah, we're going to start it now when I go back after Christmas, like the first of the year.
That's awesome. That's big props to Elkhart for that.
Yes.
That's awesome because I sat in Vicki Becker's office, I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, and she had a lot of questions about what was going on. And, because obviously I was the one that was kind of running that conversation in our community about what we need to be looking for, what we're dealing with, and what's to come. And nobody was really having a conversation, but she was one that I was able. We made it. She can't remember. I think it was at the Drug Free Partnership, and we kind of stepped aside. And she said, "Well, why don't you come down to my office and we'll sit down and talk?" So me and her and another guy, I can't remember his name now. We all went into her office and we kind of gathered around this conference table, and it was really interesting to see how interested and inquisitive she was.
Absolutely.
And she was really like, okay, so if you're saying this, and I'm like, yeah, because I was just laying the whole case out for it, and she was really, really receptive to it. Where I didn't expect that because of the talk that she gave at the partnership. It was kind of like, well, we won't get into that, but I didn't really expect that. I hadn't got a lot of willingness from much of Elkhart County at all to want to kind of concentrate on this problem. I say Elkhart City, actually, wanting to concentrate on this problem. We got a lot of positive feedback from Elkhart County, Drug Free Partnership, but when it came to actually trying to have the conversation with the city law enforcement, it just derailed. But I was really happy to see how receptive she was to it.
It'll be interesting to see how that works when I start having people, like clients, come in and join treatment that are in drug court.
Yeah, so do we know anything about the situation with Vivitrol in the Elkhart County jails? Is that more, is that better now? I mean, I know they
don't
were
know.
having some kind of, and I don't know what the issue was, or, it probably just red tape, I'm guessing.
It could be, and it could just be lack of providers. There's such a strain on any kind of medical provider that can provide any kind of medicated assisted treatment. So, you can't just go to your primary care provider.
What does Vivitrol do?
Vivitrol,
It's It's an opiate blocker,
Okay.
is what it is.
so it's medicated assisted treatment.
Yep.
One of the opiate agonist antagonist
Yes.
types.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
So you can't just go to anyone to get it. So I don't know if maybe it was lack of someone to prescribe it. I mean, I know that in the St. Joe County Jail, the doctor that we utilize over there is like based in Chicago. I mean, there's such a lack of providers that can actually prescribe. The wait list is pretty long.
Yeah.
So,
And
but I don't have any real contact with the Elkhart County Jail. We have a couple therapists.
So this
that
would
do,
be a
but I
way
don't.
to medically help people get sober, is that correct?
Sure. Yeah, we provide
From
medicated
opiate-
assisted treatment. Yeah, for opiates and for alcohol are really the two things. There's no medicated assisted treatment at this point for meth, for like methamphetamine.
So it would be kind of similar to now the name's escaping me, but what's the drug that people take to get
So
over
there's like
smoking?
methadone, Suboxone,
Subutex.
Subutex, which
Yeah.
are like
No, I was thinking like
buprenorphine.
the one everybody knows about for cigarettes. The name's escaping me.
Chantix or
Chantix.
something.
Yeah, Chantix, but it's like a
Right.
Chantix, but for heroin.
But for right, exactly.
Chantix is interesting because it started off to be an antidepressant.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So many things start off to be one thing. I think one of the drugs that I see a lot of people prescribe started out as an antihistamine.
Was it naloxone that was started off for alcohol?
I don't know if it started off as alcohol, but
Yeah, it's one of the things
Yeah.
that does treat alcoholism.
Yes. Yeah.
Which that's kind of interesting.
then we get into that whole argument, even with some of my clients or people that I work with, of like, I don't want to trade one drug for another, and I just ask people to just please talk to the doctor about it, because you're not trading one drug for another. So let's say, if you're doing something like heroin, you get on methadone, there is no ceiling effect. Okay, it's gonna ignite those mu receptors just like you're doing heroin.
What's the ceiling effect?
The ceiling effect is something like if you were to get into buprenorphine, which is a partial agonist, I believe.
Mhm.
The partial agonist, it's only gonna let you get so much of an effect. You're not gonna get high off of it.
Oh, okay.
But the
so
difference is
it helps people not
Right.
get high when they take it,
but
so it removes the motivation.
it's a calmer cycle.
Mhm.
So let's say you're gonna do heroin, you're gonna do an opiate, say you're gonna inject it or you're gonna snort it. That's a very fast rush,
Yeah.
right? And then you
Milliseconds.
fall really quick.
Mhm.
The half-life is like nothing. So it
Yeah,
gets
10
out
minutes
of
or
your
something.
system super fast. But the medicated assisted treatment has a lot longer half-life. It's going to stay in your body a lot longer. And the onset of it is going to be so much slower that you aren't going to have those cravings. So it's really not trading one drug for another. It's just like going to the doctor to get medicated to help you stabilize. So then we can treat all this other stuff.
Mhm.
Now we can treat your anxiety. Now we can treat your depression. Now we can figure out what might be going on medically.
Well, not only that, I think it's very important to make people understand the difference between a medically assisted treatment drug or
Right.
Medicine compared to the heroin you buy off the street.
Right.
So, I mean, we can get into the conversation about injection sites, which I'm still kind of on the fence about, but it makes sense when you think about if you have, in the best setting there, you have pharmaceutical grade heroin that's being distributed to people who otherwise would be on the street getting something that's possibly laced with fentanyl or carfentanil or whatever else it is, using dirty needles. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into play there. When you talk about things like methadone, which is one of the biggest things that people push back on medically assisted treatment, is part of it is about understanding that they're no longer necessarily at risk of accidentally ingesting carfentanil or fentanyl or overdosing.
Sharing needles.
Yeah, sharing
spreading
needles. Right.
disease.
It's a more clean way to maintain those dopamine levels, basically. So, I mean, to me that's always been a huge factor when people try to push back on medically assisted treatment. We trade one drug for another. Not really at all, because you're getting a more clean.
Mhm. It's just more controlled.
Yeah, it's more
Yeah.
controlled and it's cleaner. I think safer, a lot safer than injecting
Right.
street heroin.
Half the issues that we have with drugs, it seems like, are because of the drugs themselves, and half of it is that we're having amateurs making them.
Right.
And that's always to me a huge argument as to why to legalize. People often say, well, even something like meth. I'm like, no, especially something like meth. That way your neighbor's house doesn't blow up.
Right.
That way, I've had friends that have gone out on EMS calls where people were burned half to death because of something blowing up. You don't have people ingesting dirty drugs that are even more dangerous than the drug itself. The drug is bad enough.
I'm not prepared to walk out on that branch and say we should legalize all drugs. I'm not saying that at all, because I don't know. I'm not educated far enough in that and how that would play out environmentally.
What it would really do.
Yeah, because we have to understand that because we've never done that, there's gonna be effects that we don't like, that we have no idea about yet. So I think that's important to point out. So when we look at the rates, that when we look at what we think to be a healthy community, right? And we always have this conversation about utopia, dystopia. You know what I mean? And you can never have a utopia. Not possible. So
utopias turn into dystopias.
Yeah, by nature. But it's like it's almost like we're looking for this utopia, and I don't think there is one. Because when we talk about mental health and mental illnesses, like I was saying earlier, it's like it seems like everybody knows they have one. It almost is it's almost normal to have some kind of mental disposition, whatever it may be. I'm sure Brooks got me pegged for 2 or 3 already. So I think, are we stigmatizing that too?
Mental illness?
Yeah, I mean mental illness. I'm trying to draw this line here. I'm just drawing as I'm talking. So
I think mental illnesses become a little bit more unstigmatized than addiction at this point. I think people are getting a little bit more comfortable talking about it.
But I think they're one and the same.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, because if it's a chronic brain disease, you're dealing with the mental part of your body. I mean, it's still
I think
still talking about mental health.
And I think that's one of the reasons that you can't treat one without treating the other.
Yeah.
So if someone comes into my office and they have an addiction, most likely they're going to have a dual diagnosis. Whether that dual diagnosis is a very severe mental problem, like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, something that might really need medication to regulate it, or whether it's something like anxiety or depression that can be treated with cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, that kind of thing. You're not going to know until we get you off of substances. We have to treat the addiction first before we can look deeper and see what's really going on. So a lot of times I'll have people say, I don't want to do a group, man. Like, I just want to just talk to someone. Or I don't, I wouldn't use if I could just fix this part of my life.
So, but we see a higher rate of success in group therapy, though, don't we?
I'm not sure. I've never looked at those numbers.
I think
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I'm not going to say because I don't remember who it was, but we were talking about how, because it's peer support.
I prefer group for addictions. When I was in grad school, I said I'm never going to run groups. Could not pay me enough to run groups. I hated it. Through classes, through everything that we did, I just hated it. And then I got into my internship. I started running groups, and I thought, this is where the magic happens. Like, this is where there's no one person with any set of circumstances, any past history, any life stories, any knowledge that is going to be able to give to this person what 20 other people can give. These stories that they learned from. We were talking
just even curing the loneliness of feeling like you're the only one.
Feeling like you're the only one, exactly. And so we talked a little bit earlier about people coming in and they're forced in at that action stage. If I can get them in the 8 weeks that I have them in my group, if I can get them to leave just being in the contemplation stage, I'm happy. If I can get them to just finish with me and go into aftercare thinking, okay, maybe I need to prepare and really start taking this seriously. Surely I hope they do that in my group. Hope they do that before they come in. But if I can just get them to recognize before their life really falls apart, then I'm happy.
Well, in that group, with group therapy, you have that peer support. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the rat experiment, where now you have a community of like-minded people who understand what you've been through. I think that's one of the reasons it's been found to be so much more effective. Peer support's been a real big topic over the past 2 years or so, I think. especially here where we're talking with John one time about getting people be licensed.
Like licensed clinical? Like,
No, not licensed.
Addiction,
Yeah, it's
the addiction therapist licenses or something.
no. It's basically where you have somebody who
oh, peer recovery
peer
specialist.
recovery specialist.
Okay.
Yes.
So we do. So yes, that has been such a huge, I for lack of a better word, blessing, I guess, or it's just been such a good thing to have. So we have one at our location, and I'm not sure what they have at South Bend or the other locations, but it's basically someone who has struggled with some type of addiction, and they go through this training so that they can learn how to do the motivational interviewing, have some of those therapeutic skills, but they also offer much more of a peer relationship to people in the group. And they come in, they sit in on groups with us. They're a little bit more, I guess, kind of like the group equivalent of an AA sponsor.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
they don't have to have quite as many therapeutic boundaries as the therapist would have. They can get a little bit closer.
Right. Yeah. Not necessarily. They're not necessarily tied to the Hippocratic Oath
Right.
to such a constraint. But also, it's important to know that the people who qualify for that position have been addicts previously.
Right.
Okay. So there's already a plethora of knowledge of where they're coming from and how they've gotten to their recovery.
And people
as well.
just knowing that the person they're talking to has been through what they've been through,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super
even in
important.
some way.
Are you allowed to talk about that in group? I mean, I don't know. I know you guys don't like to get real personal.
So that's
I'm gonna
That's
light
a-
this cigarette. I've been trying not to. I've been trying not to light this cigarette because she said she don't get lung cancer tonight, but I do.
So that is a really big topic in therapy and social work. And I think that you would get a different answer depending on what therapist you talk about. The way that I look at it is I don't think that you have to have had a drug problem in order to be a competent addictions therapist.
Sure.
Just like I don't think
Don't
that
you
you
get a
have to
drug
have had cancer
problem
to be a good cancer doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
You can have it touch your life in any way, or just be a very empathetic, knowledgeable person who knows how to give you that space and sit with you in that space. But some people say don't share anything. Some people share everything. I look at it like, is me sharing right now therapeutic?
Okay.
Is what I share with my group right now going to make this about me, or is it going to further the conversation about what we're talking about with them? So I am open in my groups. I do tell them about a little bit about my past. Now I don't go into, man, one night I did this and this and this. They don't need to know that.
No.
Well, that tends to lead to glorifying.
It
too.
does. It
Yeah.
leads to glorifying in it. Yeah, absolutely. So, just kind of on a more general level, But sometimes I struggle with that because if my co-facilitator doesn't, I don't want them to look at me as though I'm the real therapist and this person isn't.
So you get that white coat effect.
Yeah,
So you don't get,
absolutely.
Yes.
So it's a fine line to balance for sure.
It's got to be difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I know a lot of people in that field struggle with it. I know I did. I came to a point where it was just like, so somebody externally made a comment about pictures on my Facebook while we were trying to get funding for the organization. Okay, I'm not gonna tell too much of the details of the story, but it was like, so we're gonna fund this guy who's flipping off the camera in this picture, and they were funding my organization, right? Made up after my brother, right? The picture that I'm flipping off the camera in is me and my brother flipping the camera off. So it was kind of ironic that this is what they found to pick on. And I thought, really? Like, people who don't have a good time can't do great things in the community? You know what I mean? And
Right.
and going back to what you were saying about
Oh, dude.
about
There's a whole conversation thing.
Yeah.
Someday we need to come back to that.
Well, and I think one of the great things about the position that I finally realized I was in was a position that the other people, my colleagues that were working in that field professionally couldn't do, was just completely speak their minds and not really care what people thought.
Right.
And I lost funding doing that, but I thought it was important to make the point, like, we're all regular people. We all can relate to this problem, and everybody has a story. Almost everybody has a story that has to deal with addiction. We've all dealt with this.
Right. Whether it's us or whether it's just touched our life
Parents,
through a parent, a
grandparents,
friend,
yeah.
something like that.
Well, and through the stigma of conversation or professionality, however you want to chalk it up, it seems like people in that field can't be as effective as they could be sometimes when they've completely restrained themselves, or they feel like, because I know I that's kind of how I felt, was like, how am I supposed to keep, because I had heroin addicts coming to me online and calling my phone, and I'd take them over to Oakland, we'd get them started. Talk to Michelle sometime. How many times did I show up? Michelle, how many times did I show up in your office with an addict? Just came in like, hey, I'm on my way with this person. Several times we did that, and it was really cool. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they could just tell me. They didn't feel like, there was this white coat separation between us, and then they're just dealing with this real dude. But then it got to a point where, okay, now the news cameras are on you all the time, and you buy all these professionals and people who you want funding from want to put you in this box. You're supposed to act this way.
Now you're
But I
supposed to
wasn't.
be this certain face of the community.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
can't be genuine anymore.
Right, I can't be me anymore, and that was part of that was one of the problems that I struggle with a lot, because I feel like I'm a pretty smart guy, I'm a pretty well-spoken guy, and I'm a pretty well-intentioned guy. Like, who does stuff like, start a nonprofit for no reason? Well, who starts a nonprofit from a grassroots perspective and grows it into, something like what we did? And I think people don't take that into account. When I stand on the stage and I'm doing a presentation and I'm saying, I'm pushing back on the very ideas that we talked about tonight, that people, this misconception that people have about addiction, and those people are my funders, and they don't like hearing that. But I don't care, because I don't feel like, if you disagree with this, then we're not on the same mission, and I don't want your funding.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I feel like that could be very, very frustrating as a treatment provider.
And that's where the peer recovery comes in great, comes in handy for us. But a lot of times I try to get to the bottom of why they want to know. Like, sometimes I'll have someone just start and they'll be like, so what have you done? So what drug did you do? So how do you understand me? I say, why does that matter to you so much? Like, I try to put the conversation back on them at first, instead of just telling them my story right away, So
do they want dirt on you, or do they want to know that you actually
have some experience,
so that they feel like they can trust you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And some people are both.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you can't tell sometimes, I don't know. So there's certain things that you're allowed to talk about, and certain things you're not. But okay, so there's one time I had a treatment provider tell me how they had a drug dealer trying to sneak into their meetings for clientele. And no, seriously.
So I'm just chuckling because I'm sure this happens a lot.
She figured him out. She figured him out, called him out in front of everybody. And it was just like, don't come back here ever again, unless you really want treatment. Because all you're doing is creating a harmful situation for people. And it's
unreal.
Unfortunately, the world is cruel like that.
And sometimes I get pushback on from people who don't want to do sober support meetings in the community because of that reason. Because sometimes people do prey on those meetings. You go to those meetings specifically to try to prey on the people who are trying to get sober. And they'll say, man, I went to this meeting and I got offered more opportunities to use than I, have in the past.
Have in my daily life, yeah.
So it's a fine line. Just like with the people I have that are court ordered, I want to be this therapeutic presence for them. They have so much punitive in their life right now. Some of them have work release, probation officers, they're accountable to everybody. So this fine line between being therapeutic and still holding them accountable and not enabling them, not just letting them get away, with not coming to group and being honest, not owning up to a relapse, not participating. So that can be tough sometimes.
Yeah, it's something I think some people don't understand about treatment too, is sometimes, so there's been a conversation that's been brought to me a few times about, well, so addicts just going to get this treatment and they don't have to accept responsibility for what they've done. But that's exactly what a good treatment will do, is not force you to accept the responsibility, but get you to understand that you have to accept that responsibility of the bad decisions you've made. You've got to deal with that.
Absolutely.
And that's a great thing, I think.
Those are the heavy nights that they don't always like in the beginning, but by the time we wrap up the end of, so my group meets 3 times a week for 3 hours at a time. So
that's a long group.
That's a lot of group.
And you guys say my podcast is too long.
3 hours. Yeah. So
that's got to be emotionally draining as a provider.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the self-care comes in.
Yeah.
You get that, what is it called? The compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
where you spend your whole day just hearing the darkest moments of, 30 people's lives, and you have to really take good care of yourself, or try to anyway.
Therapists, medical professionals,
Yes.
cops, it's all difficult.
And the peer support training, is that something they talk about, do you think? I mean, I don't know if you've ever sat in on anything like that.
I haven't sat in on that at all. I would have to ask our peer support specialist about that.
Well, that's something that's important that probably should be brought up to people who are going into peer support, because that's something I wasn't prepared for. It was
like a passion fatigue? Or...
Yeah, exactly. Because when you open your doors and you're just, there is no white coat stigma, right? I'm not Oakland. I'm not, whatever treatment facility. I'm just a guy on Facebook who runs a nonprofit. So you feel like, and you know me from, like, a lot of my community knows me. A lot of Northern Indiana knows me from music and stuff. So they know that I'm just a regular guy, basically. So they are comfortable with having these conversations with me. Well, it gets to a point where the quantity of time you're spending replying to these messages and making these phone calls, and you're not even, like, I was not even prepared. And here I am, I'm like, I'm callous to this. I've grown up like this. I have a certain callous to it, because people used to ask me, how do you do that all the time? How do you have these dark conversations with people? And it's like, well, I'm callous to it. Well, then after about a year and a half, 2 years of that, you're like,
deep breath.
Man, it's tough, because you connect with these people, and so it's almost like you're suffering a little bit with them.
When they fail, you fail.
And the relapses are hard. Yeah,
the relapses
are hard.
Are real hard, especially when you've gotten so much invested in somebody. And there's been a couple people that I've done that with, where it was like, I had one guy, I actually met him because I showed up thinking I was going to have to administer Narcan. He called me and said they didn't want to call the police, which is like the first thing I did on my way over there. I called him and said, I'm going over there, I got this. Show up, this is where it's at. What you should do in every overdose situation is first call 911. So I get over there and he's nodding and everything, but I didn't really, I could see his breathing pattern kind of deepening and softening, but he wasn't really staying in a state. So I just kind of sat with him and talked with him and kept him awake for long enough. And I developed this relationship with the kid over a couple months. And I took him in, we talked to Michelle. Man, we were all set up to get him into Michiana Behavioral Health for detox, and we were going to get him set up in ILP, and, and we went, it was down to, I got to go pick this guy up. I left work to go pick this guy up and take him to Michiana Behavioral Health to drop him off. And I was going to come back and get him when his stint was over and take him straight over to Oakland. And I showed up and went outside and called him and called him and called him and called him. It was just so heartbreaking to sit in that parking lot. For one, you feel like all the work you've done has gone down the drain. Two, you're worried about, he's had a few days clean. Is he out using now? Is he still alive? How can I get a hold of him? Who do I know that knows him? You become attached to these people.
You do.
Yeah, and it's one of the hardest things I think I ever went through, running that organization. Is just watching people fall back into, relapse back into using again.
I have a hard time detaching sometimes, even to just take a few days off. I'll be on a vacation, like 6 days off for the first time in like 3 years, a month ago, I think. And the whole time in my head, I'm thinking, okay, this person is covering for me. Are they going to check on so-and-so and ask them about this? Are they going to notice if this person comes in and their eyes are red? Are they going to, know how to respond to this person or that person? Is this person coming to group? And have to just kind of take that deep breath sometimes and say, I've done everything I can do at this point.
I'm gonna play Tetris now.
Yeah. But it's that old thing that
but you can't pour from an empty
exactly
pitcher.
That's exactly what I was just gonna say. It's that old adage that you have to put your mask on first in the airplane before you can put anybody else's on. So that's hard sometimes.
It is hard. It's really, especially when you're somebody who really cares. It's not just a job, it's a part of your life. Like, there's no setting your briefcase down. I know that.
Yeah.
So you can act like you go home and let it go.
You can try.
You can try. Yeah. Some people get really good at it. I guess over time, I'm
some people look like they're really good.
Yeah. Well, I know some people that are really good at it. They go home and they are able to set that because they know. It's like she was saying. It's about self-preservation. Like, you can't help people if you're carrying out all this baggage all the time. because you're constantly off somewhere else, especially if you are having problems yourself. You're less effective as a
Right.
provider. So,
For sure.
I sent you that video. Did you watch that?
I
Because
didn't.
I didn't watch your
Time
video
yet.
either. So right on.
The one that I sent you was about the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
So
okay.
it's the doctor talking about how it changed her whole practice.
Nadine Burke.
Nadine Burke Harris, that's right. She's
Okay.
so eloquent. She explains it way better than I could ever explain it. So
We'll post the link in the description
Okay.
for it. Yeah, but
perfect.
so there was this. Okay, because I found this really interesting. I never thought about this before. There was a. Okay, so basically there's a guy.
Oh, I did watch the one with Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
I did
with
watch it
steroids
today.
and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Right. So that was interesting.
It was
wasn't
interesting. Yeah.
It was like, okay, so basically this guy goes in, he goes to the doctor, and he's like, what is he, he's like depressed.
Was he combat? It sounded like he was in the military or something.
He was in the military, he was a cage fighter. Or
Yeah,
something. Yeah, he had something
some kind
like,
of trauma or PTSD, maybe something going on. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I think it was PTSD. But he found himself with anxiety and depression and just all around having not only just emotional problems but physical problems as well, which is something we talked about here earlier. And so he couldn't figure it out. So he goes into a doctor. They said, we're going to run this hormone test on you, basically see where your hormone levels are, right? And when the test came back, it was basically like the doctor, what it looked like is the guy was roid seeking. Because his hormone levels were so messed
They
up.
said
I
like
think
no
I
one
heard
has
this a
ever
while
had
back.
this low testosterone, this
Yeah.
low
Unless
amount of
they've
testosterone, unless they've
been
been using
roided.
anabolic steroids.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah. Yeah. And this is what it looked like to the doctor. So he thought he was roid seeking. And come to find out, after figuring out that he wasn't actually a steroid, he went and talked to the other guy, I think it was.
He found someone else, and they said
it was the guy who was on the podcast.
Yeah.
With him. Yeah. So he went and found somebody else. And he told him the situation. The guy says, well, let's run this panel on you. So he figures out what exact hormones and chemical levels were off. So then he gives him this therapeutic treatment, right? With
testosterone that he gave him, right?
yeah, well, it was other stuff too.
Okay.
There was like certain vitamins and stuff that he was missing in his body
Because
too.
he was deficient in all kinds of things.
All kinds of things, right? And when he got him on this, he evened right back out. Like he was like
Kind of like an Addison's disease kind of thing.
He said on the drive home, after
Yep.
getting his first dose of all of these vitamins, to the testosterone, the stuff that he was missing, he hadn't had more than a 2-minute conversation with his wife in over a year. And then after the first dose or the first time that the treatment, he called her on the way home and they talked for an hour.
and he didn't
just
get
felt like
road rage
himself.
one time on the way home.
There-
He's like, I'm a road rager.
Yeah.
He's like, I
you
get
know
mad one
JFK
time.
suffered from that, right?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, and there's a famous moment in his first presidential debate. He was losing, and there's like a 10-minute break, and he went back and saw his personal doctor. They shot him up with testosterone, and at the time it was still
Interesting.
speed and a whole bunch of stuff, vitamin
Right.
B and speed. He comes out and won the debate looking young and vibrant and on fire.
That's interesting.
And this is a theme through JFK's life. Is
Well, that's
he
funny.
actually
It
was
says-
not only
If people
lacking in testosterone and stuff, but he was also, because of the treatment at the time, became a speed addict in the White House. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was taking speed every couple hours.
that explains a little bit.
Well, he fixed it.
Yeah, he did.
One way to stay awake
Well, it's
23
funny
hours
that-
a day dealing with the Russians.
It's funny that you would have doctors that knew that back then to treat him with that, but that had never became a mainstream
It
conversation.
was really primitive.
Well, whatever they used, it's
You know the song
they-
Dr.
they
Strangelove?
had- they-
His doctor is the doctor that song's written about.
But if you think about how much hormones affect our body,
Mhm.
like
Absolutely.
I mean, just if we're off, how much that can affect our personality, the way we're interacting with our
Well,
family.
dopamine's a hormone. Yeah. So that's important to realize too. Is dopamine is a hormone. So I mean, I thought that was. I hope to see some more studies on that because I thought that was really interesting.
That's
I never,
interesting.
we always.
I would think of it as a neurotransmitter. In fact, when you told me that like a couple weeks ago, I'm like, I almost typed back, "No, you're wrong, idiot. It's a neurotransmitter." And I'm like, I'm gonna check. I Googled it and I went, hormone, neurotransmitter. You can be both. Okay. I'm like,
It's neat, right?
I don't know.
The brain is.
I was impressed.
Amazing.
Yeah, the brain is amazing. That's why I like Sam Harris so much. Because when he gets into his neuroscience, oh man, I love that.
He doesn't put on that hat very often, but when he does, it's fun.
He should because that's what he is, and
I
he's
know.
really great at it. And a lot of us out here talking about stuff like this could really learn a lot from that. you know.
In the background of everything he said.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, that's what he does.
Right, wrong, or otherwise.
That's how he's built his, I'm making him a drink, guys. That's how he built his career, you know. So we're sitting here talking about addiction and stuff.
I was just gonna make the joke, but you made it for yourself.
So here's a question that I'd
We
like.
talk about addictions, drinking Bacardi and beer.
Yeah, but so here's a question about addiction for you that I don't know if I've ever answered it correctly, and maybe you can help me with it. Is what defines an addiction?
I think that, so we talk a little bit about the difference between like abuse versus addiction. Abuse, addiction. So sometimes people, alcohol's legal. A lot of people use alcohol socially. They don't have any kind of a problem with it. Maybe it gets into some kind of an abuse where maybe they're starting to binge drink, but it isn't affecting them on a daily basis. To me, I think personally, addiction is defined when your life becomes unmanageable. When you get to a point where you really are not managing things, where your life is unmanageable. That's to me what addiction is.
You're suffering significant harm from that thing.
It's intruding on your day-to-day life in some way, shape, or form.
That's how I first defined that makes sense.
Family, financial, relationships,
all of
self-esteem.
Right.
Yeah. So when it starts to affect you negatively, that's a big difference between a functional addict and somebody who just is not having a negative effect from.
And the distinctions can be really blurry. I've met a few binge drinkers that they drank once every 6 months, but when they did, it was just terrifying.
Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthier or that they shouldn't, that they don't have some kind of a poor relationship with alcohol or with whatever they're using. Like I said, that shouldn't be the first thing that we. But when we look back on our genograms and we look up and we see how was this modeled for us? What happened when our parents fought? Did they fight? Did they talk to each other? What happened? Did they turn to alcohol? Did I see my dad drink for his whole life? We're going to model those behaviors.
I'm just a guy, so I don't have to say anything therapeutic here because obviously I can't. But it always worries me when I see friends in a bad mood and they're like, I'm in a bad mood. I need a beer tonight. Oh, well, you need to figure out why you're in a bad mood.
Right.
Yeah.
Have a beer when you're feeling good. Maybe have a beer when you want to play some music. Have a beer, to celebrate. But if you're in a bad mood, fix the bad mood.
Right.
Drinking beer could make the bad mood worse.
Yeah.
It does for a lot of people.
Treat depression with a depressant.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it's just a blue day.
Right.
That to me is always like a warning sign for abuse. Now that's a very blue collar guy's idea.
I challenge my clients sometimes when they say I'm a functioning addict, because I say, how are you functioning if you didn't have the wherewithal to not have drugs in your car when you're driving around?
Yeah.
How are you functioning if you're forced to be here or your marriage is getting ready to end?
So what about the guy who gets pulled over because let's just say he went to his weed dealer's house and got a bag, but he's going to go home. You know what I mean? He gets pulled over on the way.
So in order to be, that person probably would end up in treatment with me. So when I'm diagnosing someone, we diagnose from the DSM-5, right?
Yep.
So
explain real quick, just for the audience, explain what the DSM-5 is.
Okay, so the DSM-5 is our diagnostic manual that we use to find criteria.
Manual of Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, right? Is that what it stands for?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's how we look at all
the Bible of psychology, basically.
Mental health, addictions, and it's very in-depth, and it's hard because there's all kinds of things that can be one thing but look like another. So I'm trying to think of it in layman's terms for how someone could.
How you decide what thing is qualified. So to be this, you have to be this and this and this and this.
So if I'm looking for addiction, I don't know if I'll remember all 11 of them off the top of my head, but there's 11 criteria that we look for. So we look at have you ever used for longer periods of time than you thought that you would, or have you used more than you intended to? Has this caused you interpersonal problems and you've kept drinking or you've kept using even though it's caused you interpersonal problems? You spend a lot of time doing activities to get this substance or recovering from the effects of this substance. Do you use it in dangerous situations like operating heavy machinery or driving? Do you have tolerance? Do you have withdrawal if you don't use it anymore? I don't know how many that was, but there's 11 of them. So if you have one or two of those, then you might have a mild diagnosis. So
you have all 11. You're
right.
If you have,
you're
4 or
pretty fit.
5 of them, then you're looked
Mhm.
at as moderate. If you're 6 or higher, then it's a severe diagnosis. So that's kind of how, and to get into like an intensive outpatient, which is what I run, then you would have to either be moderate to severe
In that last half of the.
for the last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you haven't used for a year, then you would be like, say someone was severe alcohol substance use disorder, but they hadn't drank for a year, then it would be defined as in full remission.
Okay.
So a full year is considered
full remission.
Okay.
That's actually not that long a time.
It's not. That gets tricky though when you do have the very few people who may have a very severe alcohol use disorder or what would look like that, and then 10 years from now they can drink recreationally and not struggle to go back down that path again.
It's fascinating to me that we're starting to get to that with, like Sam talked about the harm reduction, but there's a lady that talks about it from time to time that I've heard interviewed.
I think that harm reduction model, by the way, should be applied across the spectrum. I think it's a beautiful model. I fully support that model.
When the producer pulled it up, I was just noticing that they were talking about that their same model is also used for like STDs, where you don't tell people not to have, not to be abstinent. You tell them to use a condom, get birth control, blah, 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 safe sex. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it has to be a little bit though more on a individual basis, Sam, though, because there are some people who, if you tried to apply the harm reduction model to, and they go back and use anything, it really does set off a cycle.
Okay,
of
that's absolutely true.
No, when I say applied across the spectrum, what I mean is that as a treatment provider, you should be able to.
That should be in your toolbox.
Yeah, it should be in your toolbox.
Absolutely,
it's part of your toolkit.
Especially for the very
Whereas we're at a
dangerous
point in history where there's a lot of providers that's not in their toolbox.
Especially for the high risk.
right opiate, meth, amphetamine.
Yeah,
and you're absolutely
okay.
right. If you know about yourself that you can't do X, whatever X is, whether it's a substance or not,
Whether it's
don't do it.
Shopping, gambling.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so many
exactly.
addictive behaviors, not just not just substances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actions.
Right.
Again, we're talking about a reward system in the brain, and whatever gives the brain that reward is what you will try to do. So,
even the amount of stress you can have.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, okay, we're gonna have to wrap up here soon, but so I'm gonna get a little personal here,
Sure.
okay? And well, it's a question from a personal stance, okay? And I'm interested to hear what Angela has to say about it, because so when I talk to some people of my ways of thinking, they don't find a lot of the recovery options viable to their personal beliefs. So when you have somebody who doesn't believe in anything supernatural, you're talking atheist, anti-theist, agnostic, well, not agnostics necessarily, I guess, but, proclaimed atheists, and there's so much of a spiritual connotation tied to recovery and treatment that they don't feel comfortable in those atmospheres. So how does a provider like yourself deal with that?
Well, the way that I would deal with it now would probably be a little bit different than I would deal with it if I was a private practitioner. Mm-hmm. So, Oaklawn is a faith-based, Mennonite-based treatment provider. And in Oaklawn, a spiritual relationship is a very important thing that we don't force on anyone, but we try to at least let them know, like, how is this important to your recovery? In my groups, I try to say, let your higher power be what's going to motivate you. If your higher power is your children, if your higher power is yourself, whatever it might be. As far as like community supports, I think there's one agnostic-based AA meeting around the area.
Yeah, and that's hard to do under the AA criteria.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
That's got to be some tricky language
difficult
there.
Yeah. I can't even imagine how you would do that.
Well, because when because I was a troubled kid. I thought I was O-Dog from Menace Society, when I was a kid, man. Like, it was bad. It was real bad. And so I had, I've been in Oaklawn for out in the Goshen branch, and when I was a kid for misbehaving, and they wanted to know what was going on. And basically, I just didn't think anybody could tell me what the hell to do. You can't tell me to think this way because you think that's the way to think. Like, I guess I'm a born skeptic. You know, the minute you say, "Oh, you have to do this and this is why," well, that doesn't make any that doesn't make any sense to me. Hey, can you hit the pause on or the mute on the desktop audio? Thank you. And
Lower right hand.
yeah, there you go. Maybe you could do the up and the D, the U and the D. You've got it. You've got it. You've got it.
So when you were there, was it spoken to you in a way of trying to find a higher power, or?
Yeah. So in every, you know, I spent some time downstate too, and it was, even with them, you know, it was like you have to pick a higher power. And so I went through. They actually probably drove me harder towards atheism even more because I was at that time I had nothing to do, and I had a couple years I didn't have shit to do, no obligations. So I was able to like, really study some of the mainstream religions and some of the mainstream beliefs, and it really just drove me even further away from it. So I felt alienated in that way when they got to talking about that stuff in group, and I'm just like, you know, I don't get that,
Right.
and it made me feel like there was something I was missing, that I could not achieve the sobriety
You were
because
so different than
I
everyone else.
couldn't go or take the same avenue they're taking because I just, you know, without evidence, I don't.
Those
since
kind
I
of
was a
things I
kid.
think are the struggles of people that are where they are partially because they're a misfit, because they're intelligent and therefore don't have the social support, blah blah blah.
Right.
Well, I used acid for enlightenment period, you know, enlightenment points in my life. It was never like, you know, it was never like, oh, I love to do acid. I eat acid every day. I love it. But there's a euphoric, and you know, I'm sorry if people get mad at me for talking about this, but there's a euphoric part of that your brain takes a trip on, and you suddenly come to this point where you understand
You're
your
going full Joe
position
Rogan on us.
and where you want to go. Well, it's just the truth about it's
No, I don't
just the
disagree.
truth about psychedelics, man. That you come to this point. I mean, you know,
I was Mennonite. I never got that chance.
so for those of you that's never done psychedelics, it's kind of like you have this cartoonish part of it, and it's just kind of like goofy, and everybody's can't quit laughing or whatever, and it's really stupid. But then after that was the interesting part when you started to calm down a little bit, and your brain is still running at 100 miles an hour, and you start to look around at you, at your own personal situation and the world around you, and how you've been dealing with your life, and it suddenly becomes very, very, very clear about what your goals are and where you want to be. And that's something I've never gotten from any other experience in my life. And every time I came out of that, I changed something about myself to better myself to come to those goals that I come to realization.
But you can't very well pick that when you're in recovery. Is that what you're getting at? Like, that can't be your higher power. I hope. Like, psychedelics are my higher power.
No.
Are you going to bring that to group? Hey, if you're having
No,
trouble
What's
getting clean,
not
What's your
really.
higher power? LSD,
Psychedelics.
man. I'll be down at the photo hut. No.
Dude, I just because we're being silly here for a minute.
Yeah.
I played for a very short time in this metal band, and the guitarist came to practice one day, and he's like, dude, last night I was listening to some Marilyn Manson in the bathtub, turned the light off and was tripping acid. He's like, I saw his soul. I'm just looking at him like, in a dark bathroom, tripping on LSD as the water's getting cold, listening to Marilyn Manson. Not on my bucket list. Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds terrifying. Nothing could go wrong.
I'm not condoning that anybody uses psychedelics, but all I'm saying is that there is, you know, some euphoric part there where there's some clarification that happens that I can't really explain. You know, again, guys like Sam Harris talk about it, Timothy Leary talked about it, you know.
No, there's something there.
There's something there that you can't achieve in any other way in this world than by means of psychedelics. And so I always found that really interesting. The higher power part though is like I thought it was really quirky when they said the guy picked up paperclip. He said, "This could be your higher power." It's a paperclip. Like, and so in those groups, I always felt alienated. And they said, "Well, you know, what's the most spiritual part of your life?" When coming down off of acid was the most spiritual part of my life. Seriously.
No, I feel you, man.
And I understand that
We're both agnostics here. Or atheists.
Angela's looking at me like, "Are you sure you want to talk about this?" No, but I'm just trying to speak some truths, you know. And I think that a lot of times in treatment we leave some people out without realizing it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we talk a little bit about higher power Not so much in my group. I don't know if other therapists do where I work, or for me, I don't know if I would ever necessarily tell someone like, "Hey, this friend could be your higher power."
Yeah.
Or, for me, if they don't have a higher power, like,
because that's kind of like making a suggestion for them.
yeah, to me, it's more of a reason. Like, if you don't believe in God, or you don't have a religion to hold on to like some people do, find a reason, find something that's going to drive you and motivate you.
That's an excellent answer.
So it gets hard though, because I do want them to go to those community support meetings, which are God-based.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are not, I mean, I have quite a few people in my groups that come in that are agnostic or atheist or something that's not, Christian, that they don't believe in the God that, is accepted around, especially
traditionally accepted,
especially around here,
around here.
And not as a provider, but I didn't, especially being raised Mennonite, once I came out of that, when people do talk about that kind of thing, I mean, I hit the same wall you do.
Yeah.
And I think Nietzsche started me seeing past that wall, but it was really Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell.
It's Brett Weinstein.
Hero of 1,000 Faces. If you can't grasp this idea, go read that book. You don't have to believe the stories, but the stories mean something.
Right.
And they're beautiful, and you grasp something, and you can see it in even an evolutionary agnostic perspective just fine.
So
Campbell probably did. I think it's clear if you listen to lectures by him.
So, because I'm going to segue to something else here, I think that really speaks to the lineage selection conversation that we keep almost trying to have every now and then, where, okay, so you watched me go kind of on the tangent for a while because, I got a lot of scrutiny because of the scientific stuff I was posting. And don't worry, I'm going to bring this right back to mental health.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm good.
And addiction. So on our way to Chicago to see Richard Dawkins and Brett Weinstein talk, me and Calvin, it was funny that we just so happened to be having this conversation on the way, where I'm arguing that there's no utility left in the world for religion. That it's time for it to die. We're at this point where we're like prepubescent, ready to grow up from this.
He was basically starting a new atheist line and verse quoting.
Don't
chapter.
say new atheist.
No,
So-
you were.
So
You were doing it.
no, but I'm wondering, because I tend to look at things in an evolutionary timescale. Are we at this prepubescent point where it's okay? We're starting to grow up out of this acquired knowledge.
I thought that for a long time too.
Yeah, and so I'm not really, I'm arguing. Oh, there's no utility, no. And him and his friend Ryan are like, Ryan only said a couple things, but Calvin really pushed back and said, well, no, there is, because religion creates a sense of community.
And we haven't figured out how to do that as
right. We haven't figured out how to do
peoples.
that without it. And so, and I argued with him all the way, and then we went into this talk, and I don't have the details pounded out yet, so it's really hard to talk about. But we're getting into this next. So next week we're having a conversation about humanism, atheism, science, and the need for reason.
It's interesting that you brought that up and said it in that way, because I worked in the legal field for a long time before I went into social work. And so I worked in a couple of private practices that were very Christian or Catholic, very Republican, very, very, very far right, red, everything that I'm not. And I'm open about the way that I believe and feel. I try to do it in a respectful way. I respect everybody's beliefs. But I would have so many people come to me and say, I don't know how else to have this community.
My girlfriend and I have said
because
so many times, if we got offered to play in a church band, we'd go to church every Sunday. Like community, like
right.
Well, and that offers that offers a certain utility. Just speaking in evolutionary terms, to the gene, the gene's replication factor. So it's just kind of like, I walked away from that talk understanding why religion is such a utility to
So
people.
why do you think non-secular churches don't pick up as much? Like, I mean, there's non-faith-based churches in Elkhart.
Part of it is get 100 iconoclasts in a room to agree with each other and form community. who
And
have
get
been
people
misfits
around
their
here to
own
admit
lives.
that they really are agnostic.
And they've all
or
been
atheist.
misfits, and they all think they're smarter than everybody else in the room because they probably have been their whole life.
Yep.
And now they meet a bunch of other people that are just as smart as them.
It's intimidating.
Boom.
Yeah.
I mean, that was coming out of a small rural Mennonite thing. I thought I was the smartest person in the room, and I was right most of the time. And I went to college, and it's like, apparently not.
Right. Like, oh,
I'm
man.
sitting in the middle of the class going, half the class is smarter than me,
Right.
and I'm not at an elite school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good for me. I'm glad I had that experience.
I went through that in grad school because I had
Oh, I'm
done
sure, yeah.
social work before. And I had a lot of people who had gotten their undergrad and social worker had been working in social work for
Psychology.
years.
Mhm.
And here I was just changing careers at, at the time, 39 years old. And
And the vocabulary itself.
Yeah.
Sorry to keep stopping you and asking you
Right.
to define things, but there's just unbelievable amount of vocabulary.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, what you were saying about people not being able to say, I don't really, and a lot of that has to do with indoctrination, right? I've just had a conversation the other day with a
Or
friend of mine
pragmatism.
where she was like, she doesn't believe, right? But she also says she hopes her sister's rested in heaven. You know what I mean? So
I get that.
yeah,
I totally
about
get that.
it's about
Yeah.
the language that we have in our culture. So I don't think it's really hard when you become an open atheist, right? And like me, I'll have the conversation anytime. Doesn't matter to me. You have to watch. It's weird. You have to watch what you say. It's kind of like Christmas. Richard Dawkins and his Christmas tree. You know what I mean? Like he puts up a Christmas tree, but then like CNN or whatever gets a picture of his Christmas tree and they run him up in the funnies about it. It's like no, because it's a part of our culture, and that's why we talk this way and do these certain things because it's a part of how our community is.
Well, and we know our hearts. We know our intentions. We know the basic morals that we live our life with.
Mhm.
But when we talk about not believing in a way that other people believe, there's this instant judgment that how can you have morals without religion?
Well, we can get it. Okay, I can answer that real quick with another question. Well, how did the Jews make it across the desert before they realized their religion? Without killing and raping and murdering each other, to death, basically, to extinction.
I always, there's a simpler way to say that. So without your
I'm
religion,
just trying to use their
would you
story.
rape every woman that you came across? Because I've raped all the women I want to rape, which is a big sum total of zero.
Zero.
Right.
Yeah.
I've murdered all the people I want to murder.
Yeah.
Big sum total of zero.
That does get very hard when
Mhm.
most of the community support that we have to offer people is
It's
faith-based.
faith-based, yeah. And so, I wonder about that because I've tried to have that conversation, just being in the position of maybe being your colleague, right? Or being thought of as being in that line of work, is how can I have that conversation because there's so many people who don't believe. And it's not saying that people that don't believe become drug addicts because they don't have God in their lives. No, because there's plenty on both sides of that fence. But what I'm saying is when you have somebody that's looking for treatment and your treatment, all the treatment is faith-based, where does that person go? How does that person get that sense of
Maybe this is a
community?
very small minority, but they're out there.
It's not a small minority. I think
Surprisingly
anybody who
not.
says they're spiritual is probably agnostic.
Yeah.
Anybody who says they're agnostic is probably an atheist. So
I've been wondering if I should say this, but I have a very close
We're
relative.
getting off of mental health here,
Yeah.
aren't we?
I have a close relative that he's literally a deacon.
Yeah.
Grew up loving him, understanding him. We got talking, and it's clear to me he's basically an agnostic.
Mhm.
He won't say he is. If
Well,
you push him on
most
terms.
bishops are agnostics.
Yeah, I wonder how many people there are that are true believers that have an IQ over 100. That's judgmental to say, but I really do wonder.
So let me bring this back real quick because we have to wrap up here soon. But I will say this is, we spoke about John Horsley in the beginning. John is, I'm sorry if I said this wrong, John, but an ordained minister.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, okay. John is a faith-based guy.
Very much so.
And I'm very, very proud of the relationship me and him have created as being opposites in that aspect, but have mainly been able to focus on the work that we can do together. So I think there's a place for non-believers, for agnostics, right?
There's room for everybody.
Isn't there?
To work in this field and also find treatment in this field. And maybe we need to open up those options a little bit, or maybe people just need to feel more comfortable coming forward in any treatment situation. Say, look, I don't believe that. What other suggestion do you have? Like, what else? And that was a great suggestion, by the way. Even if you use your own self, your own life.
Everyone has a reason.
Yeah, everybody should have a reason.
Everyone can find a reason eventually, hopefully. I just look at people that come in, they're beat down, they feel hopeless. And the best thing I can do for them, especially the parents, is I just say, like, you're my hero. Like, you're doing right now what I wished my mom would have done my whole life. No matter how many times it takes you to come through this, no matter how long it takes you, no matter how many lapses or relapses, there's hope.
That's beautiful.
And you're here, and you're my hero because of that. Truly.
That's beautiful. I love that.
And that's why organizations like mine believe in naloxone so much, because it's about keeping you alive long enough to get you into treatment. Because if you die, there's
it's the end.
Yeah, there's nothing else.
It's the end of the road.
There's nothing else. If anybody like me or Angie or anybody else we talked about in this podcast and I can help. So it's important that when you look at people with poor mental health or with an addiction or depression, that you just stop and try to understand their actual position. And before you go, off on a tangent, sharing bullshit memes with absolutely no factual foundation that are based on opinion, you should really do your research, because you're doing more harm to your community when you do that. In your community, like we was talking about earlier with lineage selection, your community absolutely has an effect on how you live your life.
Absolutely.
And when you put negative back into your community, that's going to come for full circle back to you one way or the other, whether it's recognizable or not. So it's important that we invest this positive humanistic approach in our community about understanding and fully understanding situations, and not just making these large claims about subjects that we don't know about. I could have never sat up here 4 years ago and said anything about addiction that was helpful, not one thing. But after doing the research and talking with people and actually engaging in the intellectual conversation that goes along with that, I've been provided that opportunity to work with great people like Angie, Brooke, and John Horsley, and John Gallagher, Sherry Littlefield, and my friend Calvin here even. But it's about understanding your argument, understanding what the real problem is. It's not about trying to prove if what you say is right or wrong. It's about understanding what is the correct approach. And it doesn't matter who's right or wrong, I think. Am I making sense?
You're making perfect sense.
If I could say anything to the community, I think it would just be that these people that I work with are beautiful, wonderful, flawed human beings. Just
like all of us.
Just like all of us.
Yeah.
Their flaw just happens to put them in a situation sometimes to where everyone gets to see it, where the rest of us can kind of keep our stuff under wraps a little bit. But these are people that are artistic and intelligent and really have a lot to give back to the community. They just need our help.
Yeah. They need to know that opportunity can't be there for them. And I hope, I without trying to boast, like, you heard me. I used to be addicted to methamphetamines. I came from a trap house, and I used to be a pretty bad kid. But here we are. That same guy was able to start a nonprofit and really do some great work in the community. And anybody can do that. It's just a matter of getting the information and having, I want to say, confidence. That confidence in yourself to stand up and make a change. Like, it's really easy to stand back and talk about what the problem is. And sometimes I think we get lost in doing that and talking about, well, this is the problem, or this is the problem, this is the problem. What's the solution? And how do we get there? Because that's ultimately what that conversation should lead to. It shouldn't just stay stagnant on what the problem is or defining the problem to the point that that's where I turn that off.
And speaking of music, Angela, I just wanted to play off of the thing you said about people being beautiful. If you're one of the judgmental assholes talking about people with addiction don't deserve to be here, go through your damn music playlist and cut out every song written by an addict or somebody that's struggled with substance abuse, and only listen to music written by people that didn't have problems.
Speaking
And
of
tell
that,
me how many songs you've got on your playlist.
That's how John Horsley started every class we had when I had DSM
Really?
classes, and was playing music by someone who had some kind of mental health or addiction problem.
Yeah,
And then
I would have
talking
a hard
about
time
that.
finding any music I liked that wasn't by somebody like that.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
so are
I
we
just
saying,
want to emphasize, beautiful people have this problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
People that can do something
Good
in the
people.
world.
good people?
Good people.
Yeah, it's like I said on the last podcast, right? Is that
People that make our lives better.
mental illness or addiction? It's not so much changing who the people love; it's changing how they love, right? There's still the same people are still in there, and it's really a fascinating and humbling thing to watch somebody fall into an addiction and then watch them come back out of it, and you find that they love the same people the same way, and just kind of something got in their way for a while. It's kind of what it looks like. So, when you look at that family member that's got you frustrated about, they won't just stop. They have a lack of willpower. Like, that's just a completely ignorant way to approach that problem. And I think a better understanding about what addiction is and what mental illness actually is, and the scientific, like we said, the nature versus nurture aspect, where, and, I think we've said tonight that both of those play a part. We have to take that into consideration in that conversation. And just as a warning, if you don't know enough about a subject, don't start the conversation. Like, learn about it, because you don't want to create more harm than good.
Find somebody like Angela or
Yeah.
you that knows something about it.
Yeah.
Get-
I mean,
get some education.
we're all on Facebook too. You got questions. I mean, you look around, there's plenty of people on Facebook that are willing, professionals,
Mhm.
not your cousin.
Not me.
Even as a
People that have
professional,
done this.
I learn every day.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Every day.
and that's a beautiful thing too. It really is. I think we got to wrap up here tonight. Okay. 'Cause
I think I got to work on growing my beard out for next time if you have any.
If you want to match. Your hair's longer than my beard, though.
you better get caught up on your testosterone.
Thank you for having me tonight.
No, absolutely.
Anything that you
It was
wanted to say that we.
No,
If
no,
you want
not
to add
at all.
something, or
Yeah.
No, I just
send some shots out to the homeboys, or
I'm just really grateful that I found this. I've been given the blessing to work with these people, and I've
That's
been
beautiful.
given the blessing to see some lives change.
absolutely. And just because we talked about them a lot tonight, just want to kind of shout out Oaklawn for being, I think, one of the greatest treatment providers in our area. One of the only ones in our area that's willing to work with you regardless of your income. So that's something very important to note. And some of the greatest people I've ever worked with in my plight, my personal plight, has come from that organization. We worked with, we put together an event where we were able to get almost every treatment provider in the area together so they could start having the conversation again that was falling apart before. And so, not to say that these other treatment providers aren't really great people, but I really back up Oaklawn a lot, because some of the greatest people I've met in
Oaklawn
this
seems
plight.
like a special place.
Yeah, it is. It is very, very special. Ran by a very special guy, and so thank you for being a part of our community in that aspect.
Thanks, Angela, for coming
Yeah.
from Oaklawn.
Yeah,
To talk to us
thanks,
tonight.
Thanks for coming tonight, and it was finally glad to.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Glad to finally meet you face to face. So I'm Sam from Out of the Armchair Podcast. My co-host Calvin. Alvin. I heard the chipmunks.
Alvin the Chickmunk.
I heard. I swear to
Too
you.
much talk about psychedelics.
What were you doing earlier today?
I was listening to the Christmas song, the Chipmunks Christmas song. So I'm Sam from Out of the Armchair. My co-host Calvin, and my guest my guest Angela Wheaton for the night. Again, we thank you for coming out and having a conversation with us, and I hope we can do this again soon, because this has been fun.
This was
Interesting
nice.
Interesting conversation. So if you like what you see here tonight, go down and click that subscribe button there on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook at Out of the Armchair Podcast, or you can find us on Instagram, Out of the Armchair Podcast, all one word, or on Twitter at Of Armchair. Again, it is right there. So write that down, and I guess till next time, I will see you later.
Peace.